Right. So our next speaker, I must say that I met him last night for the first time, and I'm really glad he's here. I mean, thanks, guy. Thanks, man. This itself requires an applause. But jokes aside, we are serious people here. So Seth is going to tell us how to build beautiful UIs in Ruby on Rails native. No? No, yeah? No, it's okay. Right? Okay. No stress. Right? Okay. Beautiful UIs in Rails native approach.
Okay. Hello? Oh, there we go. Wow. So, yeah, I'm going to be showing you how to build beautiful UIs for a little bit of this talk, but there was a crazy story that happened on Friday night. So, I hadn't met Joel before. I've hung out with Steven a couple times, and we got a lot closer on Friday. What happened was we went out, met a Polish friend, went for drinks, and we got him hammered. So we went out, had a great time, and every time we went through the streets, you get really good recommendations from locals to go to certain places, and bars, restaurants, whatnot. And they just kept on recommending to go to these places. So after 3 recommendations, we went to the titty bar and got locked out of our hotel. And I'll finish the story later. So, building beautiful UIs with Flex and Ruby. I'm Seth Horsley. I work at StateCert, and we needed to figure out a way to move from the MERN stack to Rails. So 6 years ago, we started with MongoDB, Express, React, and Node.js, unfortunately. It was whack. So then I learned about Ruby on Rails, Ruby, and since I'm the owner, I decided it's migration time. There were some nasty migrations. So about 4 years ago, we started migrating from Rails, from MongoDB to Postgres, and that was nasty. Syncing Mongo and Postgres is a cluster fuck. It's horrible. So after figuring out those parts, we wanted to see how we can figure out the front-end side of things. So how do we, from React, Railsify the front end? So looking at how the architecture needed to look, we needed to migrate in a decent way. So we looked at a couple different options. We needed to keep in mind that we had some more complex interfaces and some data dashboards and some internal tools that used React quite heavily. So some of the options we went through were default Rails views, so ERB, action view. We could also build a custom component system. There's view components, and there's Flex. So going through just the default ERB view, action view setup, ERB is not very modular. Template logic is very coupled with the presentation. Hard to use, small components. You can't really make a button partial and just sprinkle that everywhere. It's really nasty. And then testing of individual parts was a lot more challenging from some of the other options that we went through. There's no enforcement of, it's weird, these slides are not, I'm not used to doing it in presenter mode here. There's no enforcement of component boundaries, and it's not a very pragmatic approach. So what do we need? We need something extensible, fast, and as simple as possible. So that was a no for ERB and Action View. Went through a custom components. So there's this idea of slots that's used quite a bit with custom component systems, view components, and it's kind of interesting. We'd have to re-implement the render function. There's a couple other things that we'd have to sprinkle in to be able to get it kind of up to par with something like view components. And a lot more decisions and a truckload of work. So that was hell no. The other option was view components. Faster than ERB, that's a plus. Used in quite a few big apps. It's working right now. Uses slots, kind of interesting. But you have this logic splitting, where you have your view component, you have your component RB, and then your component HTML.erb. Wasn't really a fan of that. So 2 paths of logic obviously is not as simple or maintainable as one. And the worst part is the creators have been moving away from it. So that kind of scared us a little bit. So, what the hell? There we go. So that was a no. And we found Flex. It's a Ruby library for building object-oriented HTML views. It was a really, really interesting journey. We found out about Flex. We looked at different libraries to use Flex with for building the UI, and obviously it's nothing like ERB and HTML. And we really liked that it's a Ruby way to write your views. So it's one file, rules them all, handles view and logic, and obviously you have native Ruby syntax. So that was really nice. And it can be made type safe. And I should have put in there too that testing was way easier with this. So about composability, here's a little example. Yesterday, these 2 guys decided to compose something together. And they've been cooking with some amazing HTML CSS stuff. They're the best CSS programmers I've met. So here's a basic example of how Flex works if y'all don't know. So just takes a block, you pass it into the tag that you want, and it renders it really fast. So Ruby UI, it's a shadcn component library for Flex, and this is kind of what some of the primitive looks like. So here's a button. You can pass it variants, primary, secondary, and this is the beauty that comes from that. Look at that. So components, obviously, they're reusable building blocks. Each component, they're completely self-contained. You can pass things. You can override things with the library, thanks to Flex. Components can be composed together, and everything is a component. So here's an example component. Select dropdown, go to the website, copy the generator thing, slap it in your terminal, and it generates, it extracts, it ejects the component from the gem, installs it locally so you can maintain it, and there, copies all the components for the, oh, you can't see my cursor, but yeah, it copies all the components for the select, dropdown, installs any dependencies that JavaScript has, and we take the snippet of code from there, and then you put it in your editor, and then you come up with something like this. If it will play, there we go. So animations and everything. So it really worked out really well. We have a bunch of components, and we would love some more help building some more. If you all need some, it has. There's a few companies using it in production now, and it's decently full, but there's still more to do, obviously. So here is a more in-depth snippet of some really cool components you can make. Joel is gonna come up here and help me. So give a round of applause for Joel.
I can't remember what the slides are. Oh yeah, so Seth wanted me to basically explain how Flex kind of, it implements this philosophy of the accordion of complexity where you can kind of expand and contract the accordion. And this is just an example, which one is showing? The left one? Of a table component that you could implement in a bunch of different ways. And we're actually just going to look at the interface rather than the implementation. But this is like the most basic thing, the most basic idea of a table component, where you're essentially just, you're calling the table method, which is how you render the component, and you're passing in the data. And the component is just going to look at that data and iterate over the rows and the columns. Actually, this one we did write an implementation for. This is kind of what that would look like. So you're going to grab the headers, grab the rows, and then within your view template, you can just use Ruby iteration and interpolation and stuff like that. This is another approach to a table component where you could break down each part of the table. And you could say, my table component is just going to wrap this one piece of HTML. So it's just wrapping the table tag, but it's going to kind of compose it together. It's going to add maybe some additional markup that you might need, tailwind classes, that kind of thing. So this is another way that you could do it. You could just have a very granular set of components and you just use a lot of them. And this is actually how, I think, pretty much how it works in Ruby UI, right? But then you can kind of go further and you can compose it into something that's more like this. And this component, I can show you how this would be implemented, but basically the interface that you can make from the component system, where you something like this, where you can say, my table component just takes an enumerable list, like users, and then I'm going to use this DSL to define the columns, and then it's going to iterate over that list of users, and it's going to execute the proc on the user. And the advantage of being able to build something like this is that you can think about your tables just in terms of columns. You don't have to think, you don't have to keep your headers separate from your body and try to keep those two things in sync. They're in sync by default. I think that's all you want me to. Oh, yeah. So people, oh God. There's been so much controversy over how fast Flex is with, there was a benchmark that was run that had quite small templates, and turns out Flex absolutely destroyed Action View in that benchmark. It is not 100% true that Flex is faster than ERB 100% of the time. Flex does have to do a lot more work when it's rendering the HTML than ERB does. But if you have very small components, it does significantly less work when you're rendering each component. So if you have 1,000 partials, that's very expensive to do in Action View. It's very cheap to do in Flex. So depending on how big you're going to make these things, and honestly, the way I build views, it's not unrealistic to have a couple of thousand partials or components on a page. So we're not going to, I think the Ruby UI website is still claiming 12 times faster. I think it's silly. But I did benchmark it yesterday on my new M4, and this is how fast it was producing HTML. I think that's fast enough. That's on a single core. And hopefully that kind of puts that myth to bed. Catch me later if you have any questions about that. But it will probably saturate your network connection before it saturates your CPU. Is that it? I'm worried. Because I can see the next slide.
Oh. So, yeah, thank you, Joel, by the way. Stephen came to the Liddy party, and he told us that the hotel was locked. So they were freaking out. They didn't want to sleep in the street. So we went, validated that. We all went, tried to open some of the windows, tried to somehow get in the hotel. No, nothing. So we all ended up having a sleepover. And I didn't have a picture of that, but that's a story that I composed, and it's all true. So composable components are very essential for everything. That was us this morning. We survived last night, and there's a QR of Ruby UI, so go check it out.
One, two. Wow, that was a plot twist. I didn't expect that. Where did you lose your bow tie?
I went to I've been traveling quite a bit, and my clothes were running out, so I had to get my clothes washed and dried, and my shirt shrank a lot, or I got fat, so it was like just squeezing me, so I couldn't stand it. That's what happened.
Okay, that's just a compliment from Wrocław and good food. Okay, any questions?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have a question about Flex, maybe more specific. How does it play out with Turbo and basically this new system?
So we have a Flex expert right here.
Yeah, so in Rails, they actually have already, I think View Component did a lot of this work, the team behind View Component. There's already this abstraction called a renderable, and almost everything, well, not everything, but almost everything in Rails actually works around this concept of a renderable, or at least accepts this concept of a renderable, which is just an object you can call render in on that object. You pass it a view context, you pass it a block. And so all of the Turbo helpers, everything to do with Turbo, actually just work with Flex because it implements that interface. Also, Flex has a feature, we haven't made a very big deal about it so far because it's quite early and experimental and we're still figuring out everything about it, but it lets you do selective rendering. So, so you could configure it that when you do a turbo frame, it will actually only render the frame that you were looking for. So that's something where I think Flex is going to be able to maybe integrate even better with Turbo than anything else.
So it looks like the Ruby UI project likes this approach of a large number of atomic components and not the sort of common slots approach that you see in Vue components. I'm just interested in hearing more about why.
We don't like slots. So if you're coming from JavaScript, slots really aren't a big thing. And I have the idea that slots kind of limit the functionality. Like they're very, very tied with that component. You can't, if it's a very micro component that you could use other places, you can't do that with slots. So that's the reason.
Just one follow-up.
Okay.
My name is spelled Stephen.
Oh, where did I mess that up?
On every single slide.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Just for the
I'll get you
crowd.
drinks later.
It's good, that, guys, that you're close.
Hello, thank you for the talk. Have you ever had a situation in your organization where on some purely kind of front-end people, like HTML, CSS, JavaScript people, face this user interface written in Ruby and try to modify anything? So what was their reaction?
Ruby is so easy. It just worked. And like, especially with Flex, if they mess up HTML, they forget to end something, it shows a very good, clear error. So yeah, we didn't have much trouble having the team move over to using Flex.
Okay, thank you.
Can I have one?
Absolutely.
Actually, very soon, Flex is going to have a validator that will mean if you mess up an attribute on an element, like for example, you format the date wrong in a time element, or you use true when you should have used yes, or you use close when you should have used false. It's going to actually tell you, because we're writing literal schemas for all of the HTML attributes, basically. And so it will actually tell you, and it will tell you, here's how you messed it up, here's how you can fix it, here's the documentation on MDN for that attribute on that element. So hopefully that will make it even easier.
All right, any other questions?
Let's take a picture in front of the crowd. So this was the first talk I ever gave at a conference, and I want to take a picture to prove that I did it. Can we all put our hands in the air? There we go. Okay, that's good enough.
Can you elaborate a little bit more? How does Ruby UI integrate with CSS and JavaScript? Like, what's possible, what's not possible there? Like, does it depend on Rails pipeline, or is it okay if you use something like separate for front end? Would that work with that as well?
So we are right now tied with Stimulus. That might change, but we made it very, very firm efforts to not depend on active support. You can use it. I have a Sinatra app working with it. You can use it obviously with Rails. As far as the asset pipeline, as long as either you compile it, point it to the right JavaScript file, you can, shit works.
Does it come with its own styles and JavaScript, or does it rely on something already existing in the JavaScript community?
We're using Stimulus controllers for the components.
So
if that,
each component you implemented on your own, like the date, pickers, all of that, you implement your own versions of it.
yes, yeah. We're not using. We are using floating UI for a couple things, and we might introduce a couple other packages for handling accessibility. Accessibility is very difficult, and we might have to reach out for other packages for that. But right now, most of the stuff is pretty slimmed down. Like, we're not using many other packages. Yeah.
Got it, thanks.
You're also using Tailwind, right?
Oh yeah. Sorry, Tailwind. It's Shad CN is very heavily based off of Tailwind. There's a configuration for it. You can we copy over the application CSS file with all the Tailwind configurations for that style, and you can take it and run from there. You know.
Thanks.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, I see no. There's one more.
Thanks for the speech. I do have a question about like testing. When you render the code, and let's say you would like to test like a feature spec, like the actual rendered code and how it works. Do you have any like shortcuts to know which element to test from, let's say, in spec, to like make assumptions from the code that generated the component, and to test it, how it works, and if it really like was rendered?
So right now we're taking the string that's being rendered from Flex, and we're just comparing that. There's other ways with Flex too now. Actually,
So I don't know if the question is about testing, as in automated testing. Or
Yeah,
like it sounds almost more like you're asking, if you're manually testing, can you easily see which component created the HTML?
Actually, I'm asking about like automated testing in, let's say, in RSpec. So currently, if I would like to test the actual site, the actual like view, I would go through HTML DOM elements to find the right one. Is there any shortcut to like not have to write all the DOM tree to find the element that I'm looking for, and if it was rendered?
Yeah. So what you can do right now is there's a guide in the documentation for Flex on how to set up a testing helper, and you can choose to use Nukaguri, Capybara, or anything that you want to do to pass the HTML it generates, and then use that to query it. So you would use a CSS selector. Hopefully, in the future, we'll make a version of Flex. Stephen mentioned this yesterday, this idea that Flex could actually compile, instead of to HTML, in a test environment, it could compile to an AST that you could then query. I think that we can do one better than that, which is, I think that we can make it even faster, because in theory, you could just say, these are my assertions I want to make about this component. Can you pseudo-render it in a way that means you can come back and tell me if those assertions would have been met had you been rendering it properly? And so you can have much faster test assertions. And I don't know if we're going to be able to do this or how much work it's going to be, but there's definitely ways that it can get better.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you, Joel, for supporting. Big applause. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you.